I am now going to talk to you about the saints close to nature during the Middle Ages. And I'm just going to make one exception, St. Patrick. Now, officially he was during antiquity. He was a Roman citizen, and so part of the Roman Empire. And we usually start the Middle Ages after the Roman Empire falls. But many of the saints I'm going to tell you about right after, well, they fall in the Middle Ages. So that's why I'm including him here. St. Patrick, you know his story, probably, or if not, I do invite you to read it. So he was a Roman citizen in England. He was kidnapped by the Irish, stayed 10 years as a slave. He would take care of the sheep. He was a shepherd. Then he fled. He was able to come back to England, and then he got a vision, and Jesus invited him to come back to Ireland as a priest and be a missionary there. So how did he get so much success? Well, he studied the elements of Celtic spirituality to find in them symbols that could represent a Christian mystery. So he chose the shamrock to teach about the Holy Trinity. Some of his prayers speak of the elements of nature. Now, St. Patrick went all around Ireland and apparently was able to convert the whole island, the whole people in one generation. And he inspired a woman called St. Bridget of Kildare. And thanks to her Celtic spirituality, she saw God's goodness in all creation. The wild ducks flew to her and perched on her hands and shoulders when she called them. As an abbess, she would come out of her monastery to offer crosses woven with reeds. So really, the first people on Christianity on the island, the first Christians on the island of Ireland would always constantly take elements of nature because that's what would speak to people. There are many other things we could say about St. Bridget. She's quite amazing. St. Aventine, I'm in France now, but I'll get back to Ireland soon. Here's a story about St. Aventine. A furious bear, uttering frightful cries, came to the saint's cottage during the night. Aventine, frightened, began to pray and abandoned himself to the care of Providence. At daybreak, he opened his door, and the bear, gentle and downcast with languor, licked him and presented one of his paws with a thorn in it, as if to beg him to pull it out. The man of God did him this service, washed the wound, rubbed it with a little oil, and wrapped it in a small skin. The animal became familiar with him, and when he was healed, he withdrew in the woods. He protected a hunted, now we're talking about Aventine again, Aventine protected a hunted doe and returned some caught fish to the water. So just by reading this, you can imagine he was a vegetarian and could not, imagine eating animals. He had this relationship with animals. It says he was very familiar. We could almost say fraternal. Saint Benedict, he wrote the rule of monastic life based on a balance between prayer and work. Ora et labora. The monks had to feed themselves through farming. Inevitably, there was a great respect of the rhythms of nature. Everything about the Benedictine monks has to do with rhythm. The 7 times they pray during the day, in and out of the monastery, going to work in the field to feed themselves, and very often sell what they're producing, so that brings them money as well. We always talk about Saint Benedict, but we forget the other one who's from Nursia, Saint Florentius. Now, although he lived as a hermit in a cave, he had a hard time being so alone. One day, a big bear lay down at the cave entrance. By his friendly and gentle demeanor, the animal showed the holy man that he wanted to be his companion. He was welcomed joyfully and was trusted to guard the sheep. Imagine that, a bear guarding the sheep. What's happening? Well, remember that story of Isaiah chapter 11 or 65, both of them? There's this paradise that is found. It's the kingdom of God that's starting to grow. Well, that's when we give our life to Christ. It transforms us and we start transforming the world around us. This is what it's saying. And we have these accounts of saints that are just have an impact on the environment around them. St. Columba, I'm back in Ireland now. St. Columba of Iona. Iona, which is an island, between Ireland and Scotland. So St. Columba built the first monastery in Iona, but then went and built other monasteries on the island of Ireland. This monk took care of animals. One day, he gave special instructions to his brothers to take care of a heron that had fallen on the shore after an exhausting flight. He also loved a horse so much that it came close to him shortly before he died. So we have St. Columba right there, who's a monk, an abbot, but also really having this amazing relationship with nature. And now St. Columbanus. Sometimes we mix the two. But St. Columbanus was from Ireland and really felt this urge to become a missionary and bring this model of monasteries to, which was back then, Gaul. And so Columbanus, his name is derived from the word dove. This Irish monk traveled to Europe. He took refuge in a cave and lived with a bear. That seems to happen a lot in the first centuries, doesn't it? One day, surrounded by a pack of wolves, he blessed them, and they fell at his feet and then left. When walking in the forest, the birds and squirrels would follow him. Here we have Columbanus. Saint Kevin of Glendalough. Now, he, I believe, is Saint Francis 500 years before Saint Francis. Here's a fun story. On the first day of Lent, while Kevin was kneeling and praying with his arms outstretched, a blackbird landed on his hand and began to build a nest. Not wanting to frighten the bird, Kevin remained still and very quiet. He remained like this for the whole of Lent, praying constantly. The blackbird fed him nuts and berries. At the end of Lent, the last chick in the nest flew away, and Kevin returned to the monastery for Easter. It's an amazing example of brotherhood with creatures. Continuing on St. Kevin, because there are lots of things we could talk about. He was friends with otters in the lakes and bears. And his monastery is one of the only protected forests. I mean, historically in Ireland, when you think of Ireland, you mostly think of these vales, these little hills, olive green, obviously, because it's Ireland, and the sheep in many places eating. We don't think of Ireland with the forests, really. But the forest around Glendalough, where Kevin built the monastery, well, it's still protected today. Here's the story. The king had a goose as a pet, and he loved it very much. The goose was old and weak. When the king heard about Kevin's miracles, he asked him to make the goose young again. Kevin agreed and asked for a very specific payment. He wanted to be given the land in the Vale of Glendalough, over which the goose loved to fly. Having given the goose back its energy and youth, a large piece of land was given to him. Saint Valerie. So the birds came to Valery because of his affection. If, by chance, one of the brothers approached and frightened the birds, he told them, "Let these innocent creatures eat their small seeds in peace." One day, he gave the remains of his meal to a group of larks. A monk came calling, and frightened birds flew away. Valery, angry, said to his brother, "You should be ashamed to disturb me while I was in confession with my friends the birds. Like you, they are creatures of God." Aren't they creatures of God? So it's kind of funny because we have all these peaceful stories of saints and animals, and now we have one, getting mad at people because they're not respecting them. Saint Melangel of Wales. This woman was discovered in the woods by a hunter who was following a hare which had run under her dress to hide. The hunter, a prince, was so touched by her holiness that he urged her to found an abbey in woods that are protected today as an ecological site. Saint Maxim the Confessor. In his questions to Thalassios, he said, "Christ is the greatest hidden mystery, the blessed end for which all things were created, an end prior to all existence. It was with this end in view that God calls things into existence. Christ continues the fullness in which creatures accomplish their return to God." That's pretty mystical language, but it actually comes from, for example, the book of Revelation, when Jesus says he's the Alpha and the Omega. He's at the beginning of all things and at the end of all things. It also makes me think about the French priest, Teilhard de Chardin, who spoke in similar terms, but here we have an old Saint Maxim the Confessor saying pretty much the same thing. Also, I like this idea that the end, the meaning, the reason why creatures are there, they weren't created for humans. It's amazing that Saint Maxim is saying that, well, the reason, the ends for these creatures is that, they're for God. They're from God and they're for God. They're from Christ and they're for Christ. I'll let you ponder that. Let's continue. Saint Ghislain, a saint from Belgium. Let's see. A large female bear, fleeing from dogs and knights on horseback, sought refuge next to him. He told King Dagobert that the bear had placed herself under the protection of God. So the king went away. The bear then took the sack containing the mass kit and fled into the forest. Isn't that strange? So this saint, Ghislain, was walking and he has his little mass kit. And the bear takes it and brings it somewhere else. Now, Ghislain follows the bear because he has faith that the bear is doing the will of God. So the place where he found her became the site of his monastery. Saint Isaac of Nineveh. Now he's a very interesting saint, because at this point, the church in the east, the Assyrian church of the east, is already split from the Byzantine church, known as Orthodox Church today, and the Western Church, the Latin Church. But news from Isaac traveled far, and the other churches recognized his sainthood. So this is one of the only saints that is celebrated on the same day in all the churches. It does happen for a few other saints, but this is quite amazing. So he was the bishop of Nineveh, but he retired to the desert to write. He wrote a lot, and here's one of his writings, which is for me quite amazing. I want a heart that burns with love for all of creation, for humans, for birds, for beasts, for demons, for all creatures. We have to understand the expression demons in this context means like just the invisible creatures that are sometimes misunderstood. Let's say it like that in this case. Okay. The point is having a huge heart full of love for all creation. Now, since I read him the first time, it's actually it had a huge influence on me, because sometimes when I'm walking on a trail and I'm preoccupied by things before, it could have been studies, or it could have been my children, or whatever. I'd be walking and just looking at a landscape, but forgetting that God put us on this earth to be in relationship with others. Then I start saying that prayer from St. Isaac. God, I want a heart that burns with love for all creation, for humans, for birds, for beasts, for all creatures. Saint Giles, Saint Gilles, the hermit. A deer took refuge in his cave and lay down at his feet. An arrow, shot by a furious hunter who was aiming at the deer, pierced the saint's hand instead. You can even see it on the icon there, on the picture. Then King Flavius apologized to the saint who had protected the deer. The monk was persuaded to found a monastery in the valley. Saint Hubert. This is an intriguing story. And you can see on the picture there's a crucifix between, on top of the head there. Let's read it. On Good Friday morning, when the faithful were crowding the churches, Hubert sallied forth to the chase. He was hunting. As he was pursuing a magnificent deer, the animal turned, and, as the pious legend narrates, he was astounded at perceiving a crucifix standing between its antlers, while he heard a voice saying, "Hubert, turn to the Lord and lead a holy life." So he stopped hunting. He rushed to the church, participated in Good Friday and then the Vigil and then on Easter, and quickly converted and then became a priest. Saint John of Damascus. Now he entered the monastery of Mar Saba and wrote The Source of Knowledge, which sums up the entire Byzantine theology. Okay, so he wrote a lot. For St. John of Damascus, contemplating nature allows one to see the good, the beautiful, and the true in creation. Freedom in human nature is often misused by humans, resulting in disharmony in the world with grave consequences. Wow. So in one of his writings, he actually talks about environmental degradation caused by human greed, basically. And here's the most amazing quote. The whole earth is a living icon of the face of God. Wow. Okay. Let's just take a moment and appreciate the Orthodox tradition of writing or painting icons. What's the point of painting an icon? Well, it's to create an image. Are we supposed to adore the image as if it were God or a saint? No, it's just like a picture. If you have a picture of your deceased grandma that you loved very much, it's not your grandma, but by venerating the picture, by taking time to look at it, to appreciate, you do get closer to the presence of your grandma. She feels closer, and it has so much importance. So that's why the Orthodox tradition, and now most Catholics I know, can venerate icons. So here's where it gets interesting. St. John of Damascus is saying that the whole earth is a living icon of the face of God. So when we stop and contemplate nature, when we start venerating the whole earth as a living icon of the face of God, well, we're starting to get to see the face of God. Now, this is not pantheism. Pantheism means that we would consider the earth as being God, kind of like Gaia. So this is not what St. John of Damascus is saying. Just like the picture of your grandma that's deceased, and you take care of that picture because it makes you remember your grandma, and we take care of icons and venerate them, well, we should take care of the earth and venerate it because it's the icon, living icon of the face of God. Now, after St. John of Damascus, there aren't other saints identified for at least 300 years. I'm simply going to ask the question at this point, but it'll be answered in another section to come. So the question is, why aren't there any saints close to nature between the years 750 and 1050 AD? Why is that? I've searched for a long time. I've been doing this for a while, and there's a gap. Why is there a gap there? We'll get back to it. So now I've jumped and we're up to the year he was born in 1070. His name is Saint Isidore, the farmer. It's quite funny. He's not even the landlord. He's just a simple farmer. He was a farmer in Madrid all his life. One day his boss discovered him praying in a state of ecstasy while the oxen continued to pull the plow as if guided by two angels. Amazed at what he saw, his boss was converted. He is the patron saint of farmers. So Saint Isidore. I kind of like the date, May 15, because in Canada, that's actually the time where we, anyway, in southern Canada, that's where we start planting our gardens. So May 15th is like a feast for farming. Thank you, Saint Isidore, to inspire us. Saint Norbert. Now, he was the founder of the monastery at Prémontré, an archbishop of Magdebourg. As an abbot, he made sure peace dwelled in the garden as if it were the Garden of Eden. One day, a wolf tried to steal a lamb, and the saint spoke to him in such a manner that it lay it down unharmed and became part of the congregation. It did many chores and was loved by all. Interesting thing. So we see here that the monks of Prémontré have this great attention to the environment. Okay, it is part of their tradition. It's quite interesting to see what they've done. And some monks from Prémontré were invited south shore of Montreal in a place called Saint-Constant. And so when the monks got there, they were offered land, but it was flat land. They have a simple way of living. So the first thing they said is that they reused materials from other buildings that were supposed to be torn down. They just reused that to build their own monastery. Already that's quite impressive. But the second thing is that it was just a field. And they thought, well, we need to plant trees. And so they got it going, and through the years they planted trees. And when we visit their monastery today, well, there are woods all around, and it's thanks to them. And when there are woods, well, there are squirrels that can jump around. They don't do that in the field. Um, Brings lots of birds, and it really heightens. So thank you, monks from Prémontré, that love the environment. Saint Bernard. This Cistercian monk founded 72 monasteries. He's the author of many books on theology and is a doctor of the church. So even though he wrote many books, here's his quote: "You will learn more in the forests than in books. The trees and the rocks will teach you what no master could reveal." And now I can talk to you about Saint Hildegard. This Benedictine cloistered nun combined scientific observation and mystical contemplation of nature. She studied the properties of plants in order to fabricate medicines, as we can see on the icon. She was also a writer and composer, and is recognized as a doctor of the church. So she's amazing. We could talk a whole lecture just about her. Wrote music, invented a new language, but as a saint close to nature, it's really interesting to see. Well, two things: the medicines she was able to come up with because she would observe and do that, and the second thing is, in her mystical writings, she really talks about the immanence of God, the presence of God in nature. Again, it's not pantheism, and it's not saying that nature is God, but it's just that God left parts of his presence in nature. It's not just transcendence, he's also present. There's a great movie called Vision, the life of Hildegard von Bingen, which I recommend. Saint Hugh of Lincoln. He was gifted by the everlasting friendship of a swan. It guarded him while he slept. The swan would follow him about, and was his constant companion while he was at Lincoln. Hugh loved all animals in the monastery gardens, especially a wild swan that would eat from his hand and follow him about, and yet the swan would attack anyone else who came near him. Saint Francis of Assisi. Okay, let's just take a moment to pause and realize that I've been talking about so many saints close to nature. But when we talk about faith and ecology, the only example that comes about all the time is Saint Francis. So, if ever you were thinking that Saint Francis was an exception, that he was, oh my goodness, this saint is so different, he has so much love that he even calls the other animals brothers and sisters. Well, he ain't the only one. That's what's just so amazing. He's actually part of a long tradition of followers of Christ that are close to nature. The thing is, we just have much more to say about St. Francis because we kept a much longer biography of him. And there are many examples of him in relationship with animals. And he's one of the first to call them brothers and sisters. There's only like one other example before. The Canticle of the Creatures sums up his spirituality. Be praised, my Lord, through brother sun, sister moon, and the stars, brother wind, sister water, sister our mother earth. He also preached to the birds and tamed an enraged wolf that was terrorizing the village of Gubbio. And I can't talk about St. Francis without talking about St. Clare. Now, it's very sad, anyway, my opinion, sorry, but it's sad that St. Clare might have done things just as amazing as Francis of Assisi if she had the chance to go out a bit more. But in those days, women had to be cloistered nuns in their own monastery. They could not go out and do apostolic work like Francis did. She was a disciple of Francis and a friend. She founded the Order of the Poor Ladies, which now we mostly call the Sisters of St. Clare, but she called it the Order of the Poor Ladies, in a small monastery. She lived in extreme simplicity and praised God for everything. She tended a garden so that it became a place of welcome to humans and birds. So she couldn't go out much, but at least the animals could come to her. Let me talk about St. Anthony, again, a Franciscan. And this is a funny story. When people didn't listen to him, he turned to the water and began preaching to the fish by counting the gifts God had given them, how he created them, how much freedom he had given them, and how he fed without their having to work. And the fish came close to the shore to listen. Saint Bonaventure. Now, Bonaventure is one of the biographers of Francis of Assisi, and he was successor as superior of the Order of Friars Minor. In his itinerary of the Spirit of God, he says, well, that's the name of the book he wrote, Itinerary of the Spirit of God. He writes this: "He whom so many created splendors do not illuminate is blind. He whom so many cries do not awaken is deaf. He who is not moved by all these works to praise God is a mute. He whom so many signs do not force to recognize the first principle is a fool." So basically, the more we contemplate nature, the more we understand God. And that's why we want to praise him and understand more. Blessed Andrew Conti, as a young Franciscan hermit, he withdrew into a cave away from everything. The animals of the forest visited him, and he became their friends. His most faithful companions were the birds. He spoke to them, and the birds responded with their song. St. Gertrude the Great, she's a Cistercian nun. She was attached to the dignity of being that every creature has sovereignly from the Creator. I'll come back to that phrase, but I think that's beautiful. She was touched by a very strong feeling of piety whenever she saw one of them, birds or beasts, suffering from some inconvenience. She immediately offered the suffering of a senseless being to God for his eternal praise, and wished that the Lord would deign to relieve it of his misery. Now, obviously, she was also vegetarian, which is kind of the case of the Cistercians. Cistercians are very practical in the fact that by living out the kingdom of God, we can't kill animals. Also, I like how she talks about the dignity of every creature. Now, we're not supposed to, like some people do, biocentrism, meaning that, every life is equal. A human's life and a worm's life and a squirrel's life and a chicken's life. No, she actually goes to say that the dignity of being that every creature has sovereignly from God. So, rather than looking at everything as a resource or all life is equal, she's between the two and saying that, there's this different level of dignity depending on the different creatures. And that's one thing I think we really need to rediscover. When we're walking on a trail, when we food, when we're in relationship with nature and creatures, to recognize that by creating them, God also gave them dignity. Saint Roch, he caught the plague after going on a pilgrimage and then withdrew into the forest. Only a dog fed him by bringing him every day some bread snatched from his master's table. Their inseparable bond of friendship gave birth to a popular French expression. C'est Saint Roch et son chien. It's Saint Roch and his dog. Saint Catherine of Siena. Now, how can this is a beautiful quote that comes from Saint Catherine, and it leads us into the concept of immanence. How can people see me feeding and nurturing the worm within the dry wood, pasturing the brute beasts, nourishing the fish in the sea, all the animals on the earth and the birds in the air, commanding the sun to shine on the plants and the dew to fertilize the soil? How can people see all that and not believe that I nourish them as well? My creatures made in my image and likeness. As a matter of fact, all this is done by my goodness to serve them. No matter where they turn, spiritually and materially, they will find nothing but my deep, burning charity and that greatness, gentle, true, perfect providence. So this is part of a vision, and this is Christ talking to Catherine. But isn't that amazing to read this? So there's this idea of providence, but also of presence of God in all things. And so while we think a lot of God in heaven and transcendence, well, there's also immanence. We just have to stop and contemplate and feel it. Sergius. Here we are in Russia. Men began to come to join his solitary life. Right? So Sergius had retreated into a cave, but then people just would flock to him and thirst of what he was experiencing. The brothers elected Sergius as abbot. Although he would have preferred to remain a simple monk, Sergius consented to become an abbot, and he was later ordained to the priesthood. The Holy Trinity Monastery, near Moscow, is the residence of the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. So next time you see a picture of the Patriarch of Moscow, well, then you can think that he lives in a place where the saint was in great relationship with nature. This is just another picture. Same text, but another picture, which I find great. And now, why aren't there any saints close to nature between the end of the 14th century and the mid-16th century? I searched high and low, and haven't found any. So, what happened historically so that there aren't any saints? I'm just asking the question now. We'll get the answer in a later lecture.